Hello, everyone. This is Gorilla Peace. We are a student-started project from SFU, and we are class Archaeology 322, educated by Dr. Birute Galdekas, and yeah, we're going to be talking about gorillas. My name is Ashley, and this is Fatima.
So we started this student-led project in order to raise awareness on gorillas and their endangerment in the wild. And we wanted to provide more education and facts and information about gorillas and other ape species and how the general population can contribute in conservation efforts and how we can all basically put our little bits of efforts in order to help these endangered species. So we started doing these podcasts in order to provide information and also discuss our opinions as well as other people's and maybe raise questions and see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, definitely.
So our first episode will be on general information on gorillas.
Yeah, we will have around 5-6 episodes and we'll see if other topics come up. But for the first episode, we'll just talk to you guys about basically everything about gorillas, like how they eat, what they're like, what are the species, and just general information. But for the next few episodes, we'll have quite interesting topics and we'll ask for each other's opinions on how gorilla is represented and their habitat, what you can do for conservation, and what are the threats and how you can help them in general. Yeah.
And historically speaking, gorillas have been known as these brutish, big, described as like stupid apes usually, which is completely and utterly wrong because these apes are fascinating. The more you read about them, the more you get interested about them. I'm sure you felt like that too.
Yeah.
Reading up on them, you were surprised in many, many different ways. Coco is like the best example.
Yeah, I was obsessed with her in high school.
Yeah, she just makes my heart melt. It's just I can't get enough of her. I just wish like they had, I'm not sure actually if that's a good thing to say even, but I wish they had more experiments like that.
Yeah.
Just because it seems like this amazing
it's definitely a window into the intelligence of gorillas.
Yeah, it's great. But yeah, they are the largest primates, and I think that's the reason why they were seen as these brutish, violent, angry apes
and
in
savage.
the wild.
I think savage
Very
was
savage,
the word like that was
Yeah.
most described for gorillas. Yeah. Well, definitely they are big and they are very strong. If they do decide to beat you to death, they could. But that would be like a very rare case. And yeah, and they're vegetarian.
You would have to make them really mad.
Yeah.
You have to make them really mad.
Really, yeah. And like the chest pounding is like a signature move for the gorillas as a sign of their frustration. But anyone that's frustrated would be like doing something violent. I don't know, not just not an accusation, but typically people that are frustrated will be loud and mad, and when you put them into such a situation, I guess it's their way of expressing their emotions.
Yeah. I actually think that they have up to 60 different vocalizations that they use to communicate. So they're actually excellent communicators.
Yeah.
I think that they might have a slight temperament, but I wouldn't necessarily call them like savage, which is just ridiculous. I don't even know who came up with it really, but it's sad. It's sad that they got this image and they lived with that image for such a long period of time.
Yeah. And gorilla is since they are the largest living primate, and not just living, I believe they're the largest primate found with the even comparison to other megafauna. And they're also vegetarian, and all the species of gorilla, subspecies of gorilla, are vegetarian. They live off of vegetation. They don't really drink much water because mostly what they eat are leaves, fruits, insects, and just vegetables, I guess, since they are vegetarian. And most of them contain a lot of water, so there isn't really like a need for them to drink water all the time. Yeah.
And they actually spend a lot of their time running, like foraging and trying to find food in their environments. In fact, I think that the mountain gorillas travel less than the Western gorillas, I believe.
Yeah. So there are typically right now, while there's always a lot of debate on subspecies in the scientific world, but right now the most commonly known are four types of gorillas: the Western lowland gorillas, Eastern lowland gorillas, mountain gorillas, and the cross river gorillas. And the Western lowland gorillas is most, I guess, they have the largest population, and also they cover most areas traveled because of the way the environment they live in. Yeah, and so they walk around way more. They have longer arms. I believe their fur is, yeah, it says that their fur is grayish reddish color compared to the other ones who are more like black, blackbacks, silverbacks, but mainly black colored fur. Yeah, and they walk around way more because of their habitat and the way they just interact with the environment.
And they're knuckle walkers, right?
Yeah, all of the gorillas
Yeah.
are knuckle walkers. Yeah.
Yeah. The Cross River gorilla actually has the smallest population out of all of them. They're this isolated population in Cameroon and Nigeria. And sadly, their numbers are only about 150 to 200. They might have actually gone up now since a lot of conservation efforts have tried to raise awareness and protect them more.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, habitat loss and the bushmeat treat has been a huge problem for all ape societies, but
Yeah.
especially in our case, talking about gorillas, it's devastating to see that they
Yeah.
lost so much of their living habitat, basically.
Yeah. And so except for the mountain gorillas, all of the other three Western or Eastern lowland gorillas, so the Cross River Western and Eastern lowland gorillas, they all live around the Democratic Republic of Congo and Cameroon. Well, they all are African apes. And for the most part, they're very much situated in like a situation of war zones. So that's like very important. Well, I guess very influential to their lives now. But anyways, get going back to the topic of how they're different. The mountain gorillas travel less because their vegetation is not as abundant as those that are living in the Western lowlands or Eastern lowland. But that's why they also have shorter arm and also broader chest, because if you know anything about being in dry areas or cold areas, just in general, they live high up in the mountains, so it is colder and drier. So animals tend to, well, humans too. Humans are animals, but anyways,
Yeah.
just primates or animals, they tend to have larger body to preserve water and then shorter arms because they don't have to travel as much.
It keeps the heat loss intact as well, right?
Yeah. So they have quite different like lifestyles compared to Western lowland gorillas. And they have a broader chest. That's like the most distinguished feature of a mountain gorilla, I would say. Also, they look kind of different. If we can put up like images on the side, well, for people that are watching on YouTube, you'll see that they look quite different. And then for another type of gorilla, another subspecies, we also have the Eastern lowland gorillas. They have really black hair and they are the largest gorilla out there. I believe the heaviest too. Let's see.
So the range of their existence for all these gorilla types ranges approximately to a little over 300,000 kilometers squared. But unfortunately, the actual occupied area is only about 10% of that, which is about 3,000 kilometers squared. And considering that less than 10% of Western gorilla populations are even protected in like protected areas, you just have to think about the endangerment of these species. Like I believe that like all of the subspecies are critically endangered at this point.
Yeah. But on a positive note, compared to other great ape societies, gorillas have been on the rise. Their population numbers have been rising, and that is mostly due to conservation and also just a lot of education. It's very hard work.
And Diane Fossey actually contributed a lot of that. I think today,
Yes.
her foundation is a huge contributor to conservation efforts
Yeah.
when it comes to gorillas.
Whoa, nice lighting.
Oh, really?
Amazing. Amazing backgrounds.
That's yeah, that's extra.
It's gonna make for a good video. Yeah.
Everything for gorillas. But
that's
yeah,
gonna
so
keep the kids watching this video engaged. Fascinating galaxy light. Are you guys setting up for something?
no, I think that's just
okay.
her light, the night light.
Okay.
Yeah. So a little bit about their social
we can
structure
move on
as well.
to talk about like societies. Yeah.
So from what I know, they have these patriarchal social system that is very close knit. Like their family groups are very close with each other. They're very protective of each other, especially all of the infants. In fact, I think their connection is so strong that many times when they are poached or killed off, I believe that certain populations will take the infants in order to fatten them up and consume them later, or sell them as pets to foreigners. But in many cases, those infants actually die before they get to that point. And that's associated with their relationship or connection that they had with like their elders.
Yeah.
So they actually lose that, and then they can't cope with it at all, and they die off.
Yeah.
Which is really sad.
Yeah. So the basic structure of a group of gorillas, it's led by usually a silverback male who has the most powers and is like the center of the group. And then he is usually surrounded by a few females who are always competing for his love and compassion, I guess.
Yeah.
They're rivals. Well, they don't have that bad of a relationship, but they just like I believe compared to the bonobos that we've studied, like the bonobos will like groom each other. Well, female gorillas don't do that, even though they're in a group. They're not like
I think the female gorillas actually have more aggressive encounters with each other.
Yeah.
Unless they're like related maternally. They are kind of aggressive to each other. And in accordance with the male, I think that he is very protective of his group, and he will protect them until the end of his life.
Yeah.
He's pretty committed to them.
Yeah. And male gorillas are known to be very protective and educational to their kids. But yeah, and then occasionally we will have like the young blackback. So blackbacks and silverbacks, the difference is that a silverback is the matured blackback. Basically, after adolescence, they mature to have this really beautiful not silver lining, where it's like their hair basically turns kind of white, glistening in the sun, and from a mile
they're usually
away,
over the age of 12 years.
Yeah. And then for female gorillas, they reach maturity over the age of 8, and then they would start to compete and reproduce. And for a typical gorilla group, they would have the male, the silverback, the females, and then they will have a few blackbacks, which will probably be his offsprings. Yeah.
And the females do require the silverback's protection, because if the silverback dies out, they get very scared of infanticide. That's pretty common, I think, in many different species. It happens in gorillas as well, that if the silverback is lost somehow, that other males will not take over that role of protecting the infants. Most likely they will kill them off. So yeah, the females rely heavily on protection from the silverback for their infant's sake as well.
Yeah, and one very interesting fact we found out while researching about this, we were wondering how the females travel between groups, like when they mature, how do they find their own group? And then we found out that the female basically has their own choice. Each individual choose to stay in the group or move on to another. I guess that's part of Gorilla for you to know that they are just independent women and they choose
They're
their own
very
path.
stubborn creatures.
Yeah.
They're very stubborn too.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the subordinates of the silverback that might take over the group as well. And in fact, and another fun fact is that in captivity, the blackbacks tend to mature earlier. So sometimes they might even take leader-like roles in their community without actually having the silverback.
Yeah.
So,
is it usually the case when the silverback is gone? Or, well, I guess in captivity, there is no other silverback in their presence.
Yeah. So they might actually take up these roles. Because I believe that there was an instance where one of the females became pregnant and they genetically checked whose offspring they were. And it was one of the blackbacks that took over without actually having a silverback. Like there was another ape that was the silverback, but I guess this one over it.
Yeah.
But it is seen, so it does exist.
That's interesting. And then this reminded me of remembering Dr. Geldekas talked about how gorillas prefer to be looked up on, like when humans observe gorillas, they prefer to be like higher than humans, like physically higher than humans, and looking down at people. This well, I think it's partly related to the bigger the gorilla, their physical size, the bigger the gorilla, the higher they look down. Then you would find it like more threatening as a gorilla, right? And so they don't really like humans to be looking down upon them. Even though we're smaller, we are sometimes, some people are taller. Yeah. Or like the enclosure will be taller looking down at them.
They do have a lot of anxiety as well, especially the silverbacks when it comes to encounters with humans. In the wild, they tend to avoid humans as much as possible. But in captivity, they don't have that opportunity. And I'm pretty sure you've noticed that as well when you go to the zoos. The way that they structure that habitat is in a way where the visitors look down on the gorillas.
It's usually like a pit for some.
Yeah, and even the caves are kind of exposed. Like there's a glass wall usually that separates you from them. So they don't have any opportunity to hide away. And many times the silverbacks that are in these groups, they have immense anxiety because they feel the need to protect their group all the time.
Yeah.
So they end up having a lot of problems. Like I think it was blood pressure issues or cardiovascular diseases are still associated with stress.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I think this is another point we can talk about in our next episode, is that they're not stupid. Like, they know it's glass. They know they can see through it. And from Coco, we know that they have self-recognition too. So like, even though there is a physical barrier, they understand that you are able to look past it, and they can see that there are other people, humans, animals walking by on the side. And
actually, on that note, I just wanted to say that I believe that Jane Goodall actually asked Coco what she preferred, and Coco did answer 3 times that she would prefer it if encounters were with people that would sit down rather than stand in front of her. And she would I think the 3rd time they asked her, she said sleep, so completely on the ground. So they understand, like, you know,
was it Jane Goodall or Penny?
I think in the book, The Great Apes, it said Jane Goodall, but I might be wrong.
Maybe.
I'll look into it.
Yeah, because Penny was the one that raised Coco, but maybe Jane Goodall went to visit her and then asked some other questions.
I think that's what happened.
Okay.
But
yeah, and then this also reminded me, well, if we're talking about like gorilla and zoo issues, that most gorillas, because their natural habitat is much larger and they require much more traveling to to get their food and roaming around their habitat. Well, because they are vegetarians, most of their day is actually spent roaming around,
Foraging.
foraging food and also consuming food. Well,
Yeah.
in the captivity, that's often not the case because they don't have much land that they can walk around in. And they end up being more obese than in the nature.
And another thing that was
Lack of
observed in
exercise.
facilities, and another thing that was observed in facilities is the fact that they regurgitate their food a
Oh,
lot.
really?
They do, yeah. Like, and they for the longest time they didn't understand what that was associated with. And they believed that it has to do with boredom.
Oh no.
Yeah,
That is so sad. Well, I guess
yeah.
that is true. Oh my god, I see the cat in the back. Well,
Oh yeah.
well, I guess that is very true because in like in the wild there's so much for them to do. Like I believe I was watching that documentary and I see this giant silverback. I'm sure he's super heavy, but he's still able to manage like going up all the way on the branches and forage food like on the very top where like the best like most ripe fruits are.
Mm-hmm.
And he will climb down and then he will play with his kids and then he will also go fish for like insects, and they will go across like I guess it's not really a river, it's kind of like a creek, like a small creek, and then they will walk by the creek and play in the water, and then they will just keep on doing things all the time. They don't really rest during the day. That's like what I was surprised with, but that is like really true. And yeah, and then you if you think about it, there is not much for them to do in captivity. Like
There isn't, and if you consider the fact that over around 700 gorillas are kept in facilities around the world, and over half of them are in the States, we would have to ask ourselves how they are living, because I don't think that the conditions are necessarily perfect for them. They're not very ideal.
yeah, and you can take the best care of gorillas that you think you can take, and it would still not be the best for fit for them. Well, at least compared to the wild, it's well,
No, of course not. Yeah.
yeah, it's less of an it's definitely not the ideal habitat to be in, and often the case they get really lonely because people would raise gorillas like one or maybe two at a time, and in the in the wild gorilla groups are much larger than that, and they really do need the support of family, even though females, as we said, like in the nature females in a group don't really get along. Their presence is still important to each other to support each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, of course.
Mhm.
And we just want to throw it out there that it is illegal now to have gorillas. It is completely banned. However, which is a little bit controversial, if you did own a gorilla before the ban was taken in effect, then you can still keep them,
And that's in the
which is,
US, specifically in
yes,
the
that is
US.
in the US.
Yeah.
I'm not
I
sure if
believe
Canada ever had that.
I believe it's always illegal in Canada.
Okay.
I think except for like actual like organizations. I'm not sure, but I think Canada is usually more strict on like just wild animals in general because we are more focused on the natural habitat here. Well,
And we can have an entire episode dedicated to gorillas in captivity, and
mhm.
many I believe that many opinions will arise from that, because
Yeah,
I think that
definitely.
a lot of people, you know,
Well, we will
it's
have one about Harambe, so
okay,
that
right.
will be the one.
Everyone remembers Harambe. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I'm
I think
sure
that'll
that
be an
will be the
interesting
one.
one to talk
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
But yeah, so I believe that was a general um, base for gorilla knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that we set up. So I think that was pretty good.
Yeah. Um, yeah, definitely. I think that'll be all for today's episode. But if you guys have any questions, people that are watching this podcast, thank you so much for listening. And if you do have questions, let us know in the comments. or anything on our social media as well. You can ask any questions and we will try our best to answer them. And yeah.
And on our next episode, we will talk about gorillas as in the way that they were portrayed in media.
Yeah,
and
media representation and our first impressions of gorillas. I'm really interested in that.
yeah, I think many people's first encounter is relatively negative. I think people watch King Kong and not that I think about it, I just have to ask, what was that gorilla? Was it a gorilla or not? Donkey Kong? Is Donkey Kong a
Donkey Kong
gorilla?
is a gorilla, I think.
Okay,
I
well
believe
then
that's why he's named Kong. For some reason, I don't even know where King Kong came from, like where that name came from. And
yeah.
and like other gorillas from then just kept naming them Kong.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to know, but we will talk about that in the next episode. And I think that it will be a very interesting one because media representation, like gorilla representation in media, is so profound. Most of it is usually negative. But in more recent times, it has become a little bit more positive.
Yeah.
I believe mostly because of Coco, but also Harambe. In a way, it did change people's
social
views.
media. Yeah. Oh, and there was
either...
another really handsome one in Japan. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but there's like really handsome one in Japan that got really popular.
I have not, but I think, I mean, the Japanese do a lot though. I think that they have a few centers in Africa as well where they do conservation.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, it'll be definitely an interesting episode.
Yeah, especially
this one was more of like a
great apes. Yeah, especially studying the great apes. I believe Tokyo University has a lot of contribution, especially on chimpanzees and gorilla conservation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll talk about gorillas in the media next episode. So see you.
Yeah.
Then.
Bye.
Bye.